Okay, and just let me know if something, can't hear me or something happens. A little bit about myself. I have three girls, and my prior work before Thomson Reuters, I was in Boston at Verizon Labs for a short time, at CSIRO in Australia for a short time, and then I had a few projects at NASA JPL. I just wanted to give you a little bit of my trajectory of how did I get into user experience research. My undergraduate was in mathematics and computer science. I loved both fields, but I also took some design courses. And back then it was more design of flat, like brochures, or, just kind of that first tip into venturing, understanding white space and balance and font size and color and what draws someone's attention. I just thought that was really interesting. And I also loved my psychology courses. So when I was thinking about going to grad school, pretty much Googled design and psychology and computers, and came across the field of human-computer interaction, so HCI, which much more common terminology right now is user experience. And I went on to get my master's degree from Carnegie Mellon University. And through that master's program, my peers either ventured into more focused on design or more focused on research. And there are some generalists, but I focused on research. And at my company, we specialize in our disciplines. There are definitely places where they want generalists, but I focus on the research. And one of my going back in my history of what projects I worked on. So I had a few internships and then a graduate studies program with NASA. And that was when our project, it's kind of a fuzzy picture here, but our project was to design an interface for scientists to control the rovers on Mars and do what we called in situ retasking. So if they needed to tell the robots to do something else based on the data that they were getting, what would that interface look like? And I think a key thing that we took from that project was the idea that if you're designing something for in a very new space, so you can't just easily go and observe someone doing that same activity. We couldn't go the idea of being on Mars with a scientist sitting there and, hey, how are you going to retask this rover? We did get an opportunity to go to JPL when they were sending up their daily commands to what the robots did. But the value of what we learned was to think of other situations, other places where someone might be doing something similar. And so what we did, we observed and we talked to managers at a fast food restaurant. What happens when you get a flood of customers coming in? How do you do the in situ retasking of your resources and your staff? We went and talked to a charge nurse at a hospital. How do you look at the resources, the staff on hand at that day, the doctors, the nurses, and there might be some more patients coming in that you might not have planned for. How do you kind of task that? So that was really a valuable thing, that as you go and design something or you research something, you might not be able to learn exactly from your target audience, but you know what's something similar. CSIRO, I was there in, it's based in Canberra, Australia. And I was just laughing last night when I was looking through these slides that my projects were focused on connecting people over a distance and doing something that's more interactive. We had this air hockey table that we networked together, and you can see myself on the screen. So my manager at the time was at a physical table. He's hitting a puck across the table, a signal sends it to the other table, and behind my screen, there's like rotating canyons. And so a physical puck comes out and I'm hitting it back. And of course we're on a video conference. We also did a running, I called it running over a distance. So I created, this is my project where I created a prototype of sound, like a 2D sound space. And the idea that if you're running with a friend, but you can't physically run side by side, you're in a different location, maybe you're just at different physical capabilities, that you can still motivate each other by hearing in that 2D sound space. Are they ahead of you? Do you need to catch up? Are they behind you? Do you need to encourage them? And through that project, I did some research where I went on to some blogs. Like there's a whole subculture of runners. And so I tapped into some of their blogs and just said, hey guys, why do you guys run together? Why do you run with a friend? And got a lot of data that way, really easy data, free data. People just love to talk about and answer my couple survey questions. And then I prototyped this together and got some feedback by people running with it. But I was laughing that, we were thinking of situations where people, had moved, but now with the coronavirus, now that we're in quarantine, we'd actually might be very useful to interact with your friends this way. But this project, I learned that when you think of research and informing whether it's your prototype or your ideas, where is your target audience? Where do they hang out? And in this case, huge subculture of runners, I can just tap into those blogs or I could go to like a running store and things like that. And then last project I wanted to highlight before I talk about Thompson Reuters, I spent some time at Verizon Labs in Boston in a very different kind of project where Verizon was a big provider of DSL, so internet access. But when you ordered internet through Verizon, you got a package in the mail, a box, and you had to connect it all yourself. You had to connect the modems and the ports, and you had to filter your phone lines. And so you had to follow these instructions. And our job as Verizon was to make sure those are very intuitive instructions. So we did continuous fly on the wall observations where we would actually go to our customers. We would have a way to intercept before they opened up their package. So we would recruit our customers and say, okay, before you open the package, we want to be there. We want to see the whole experience. And the methodology is called fly on the wall because we were there to observe. We asked some questions, but not very many. We really just wanted to see whatever would have taken place if we had not have been there. And that oftentimes ended to some calls to tech support. So we would just have them, when they called tech support, have it on loudspeaker so we could hear and we could just see how are they interpreting the instructions, what was confusing to them, and then report it back to the company. And that was very insightful because any kind of observational research you do, whether it's the fly on the wall or something called contextual inquiry. Contextual inquiry is a little bit more like you're an apprentice, so you are asking questions, but both are observational based kind of research where you see all the minutia of the tasks and the process and the flow that if you just interview someone after they do this or survey them, oftentimes people forget about those details. They might have remembered their pain points or something that happened, but there might have been some of the little things that we realize are really important to us. So at Verizon, two things that stood out was one house we went to, the person had like 7 phone lines. He had a phone in like different bathrooms. And so the problem with that, you had to filter if you're going to use your phone line for internet. And his experience whenever he would have ordered that and got the box in the mail, they never asked, well, how many phones do you have? They just had kind of the default, 3 or 4 cables. So he wasn't successful that day to set it up because he didn't have enough filter cables. And that would have been a pain point, but by really seeing that and seeing tech supports just not asking the right question, like you can really see what's their chain of questions that they're asking. and you know the kind of the answer as the researcher and the observer, but you're kind of thinking, okay, when are they going to trigger the right question and get to the issue? That was really valuable. And so now I'm at Thomson Reuters, and our focus is on web applications. Some mobile usage, but primarily on a desktop. And our target audience is legal professionals. We are building tools. I show a little bit of Westlaw. Westlaw is our flagship product, and work tools. So tools to research the law, write about the law, manage your law firm like a business. So a lot of very intricate workflows, and some of our tools, our customers aren't in and day out. They might have to go in once a month to do some payroll activities, and some tools are in every day. So that kind of thinking of, does something have to be memorable and or does something have to be really efficient because they're just in it in any millisecond they can shave off that workflow counts. So different ways to think about the context of how your product is being used and the frequency of that. And a little bit about research at Thomson Reuters. So our team is 100+ researchers. Sorry, there's some knocking. I'm not sure if that's for me, but we have 100+ researchers. We've really grown, and I've started in 2008. I think we had like maybe 18 of us in different kind of disciplines in the UX team. And I think it's just the success of showing when you bring a team that's dedicated to UX onto a product development team, you can get world-class interfaces, world-class products. And our UX team is made up of different disciplines. We have the researchers, visual and experience designers, accessibility specialists, front-end developers, and also some project managers. I'll talk project managers as it's pretty closely tied to research ops as well. And there was for quite a while, we didn't have any project managers. And now that we do, it's just kind of critical that you can really focus on your work as a researcher or a designer, and to have someone else be able to just make sure the project is moving forward, it's transparent, and things like that is really nice. The legal UX research team, there's 12 researchers, myself, a manager, a recruiting lead, and we also have a project manager for our team. This year we'll have more than 100 studies that we have conducted, and any given week we have about 20 projects that we start our Monday stand-up just to review like the state of each of those projects. And methods, I'm going to take just a pause here. Does anyone have questions on what I may have talked about so far?
Any questions, folks?
Awesome.
Going back to the Westlaw research tool, could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes. Very small screenshots here. So our flagship product, but I should probably say a suite of product. Thomson Reuters, the history of it at one point, well, it's acquired and grown and different companies came together. But as far as Minnesota is concerned, we had West Publishing. And I think in, I don't know, 2005 or sometime, West merged with Thompson. So it's Thompson West for a little bit, and then it's Thomson Reuters since 2008. So West Publishing published all the lots and lots of legal books, and we still are a large publisher. And now, of course, all that information and content is online. So we have, statutes and cases and regulations, secondary materials, and it's also what we would call jurisdictional focused, that in the US, we'd have different content versus this product is global. So the Canadian interface, our content set is different. The UK is different. We have it in Asia and Australia and lots of different places, South America. And it's an interface for, the primary thing that you see here would be to research the law, but there are a lot of features that we're continue to add to it. And as of a couple years ago, a lot more AI functionality. So the idea is we want lawyers to be able to find, of course, what they're looking for. We want the interface to be able to suggest, well, here's some similar cases that you may have missed. It's a lot of recommendation kind of guidance as well. Is there any other specific questions on that?
Is Thomson Reuters related to the Reuters news service?
Yes. Yeah. So in the 2008 merge, Reuters is the news component. And I think they're primarily based maybe in New York and UK. But as of a couple years, in the past couple years, I think in 2014, I was looking at an old presentation I actually gave to Metropolitan State. And we had like 8 business units. And now we're down to a much more focused company where we focused on legal, tax and accounting, and then we got our news. But yes, Reuters is the news. And we got some pretty amazing graphic capabilities that the Reuters team is working on, particularly around the COVID-19. And so there's some good sites. If you just go to thomsonreuters.com, they have kind of up-to-date information there. Yeah. So the methods, I love this visual. So thanks to the Nielsen Norman Group, also a great resource that I'm continually going to their website. And this is the terminology that we often use. So when we think of research and the different point in times and product development that were involved, we use the terminology of discover, explore, test, and listen. So discovery phase would be in the beginning, it's kind of a little more wide open playground where we can better understand what are the user needs. We would probably be doing we often like to do contextual inquiries here where we're observing our target user in the context, at least maybe a similar context if it's a new product, or maybe using a product that we want to update and better understand their needs, their pain points. We do a lot of interviews. Yeah, so you're just kind of discovering what is going to make this product great. So what pain points would we want to solve, or maybe what gaps are we not covering? Exploring is when we're doing a lot of rapid prototyping, and maybe just the difference between test and explore would be explore phase. You're more kind of wide open. You might just be trying, see what sticks. You might have very different ideas that you want to get feedback on. And then as you move into the test, you're more usability testing and you're more narrowing in on your solution and just more incremental improvements and changes. Versus explore, you might be doing a lot of shifting and bigger movements between your designs. But both can look similar as far as testing, other than different kinds of prototypes. And for most of our recent research, the past several years, we do remote testing. So now, of course, it's no different. All of our testing is remote. We did travel from time to time, of course, for contextual inquiries to where our customers are, and hopefully get into their office and observe them. We would time to time travel to different labs that we would rent out, primarily in the US. But now, but on top of that, we would most frequently be connecting with our customers remotely, because you can just recruit customers across, the US, or have some customers in the UK participate in the same study that you have with some US participants. But I'm going to talk a little bit about research ops and the tools that we use, because we haven't quite fine-tuned it either, even though we've been doing it for a long time. There are some gaps in just the tools out there. So you kind of have to make do with what you got, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. So explore and testing, you're just getting the feedback on your designs, whether it's just feedback or it's testing more the usability. when we test usability, we're using a think aloud protocol. So you give your participants, we call them tasks, so things to do in the interface. And then you observe, you know, was it intuitive? Could they, as they thought out loud, could they complete that task? And if not, what hung them up? What could we do to make that flow more intuitive? Listen. Our different department at Thomson Reuters actually does a lot more of the listen aspect, but it is a very important piece. And that's when you have a product that's out there, and rather than just launch it and then like set your eyes on something else, it's good to continually listen to that customer, listen to what, how they're using it, if they have pain points, if there's usability issues. You know, when you launch something, it's not going to be perfect most often, so you're probably going to have a backlog of usability bugs that you're still going to be fixing. So listening to see, you know, what needs to be prioritized. And at Thomson Reuters, customers reach out to us. We have a full 24-hour staff of, we call them reference attorneys, and they're not really tech support. We have tech support. We have tech support, but we also have the reference attorney department, and a legal professional will call them with more of a question of, I'm researching this topic in this, I need to find something for my case about this. And they actually help provide that service of helping them use the products to find materials. Now they're not going to say this is, you know, this is it, but they're going to give them kind of in a way like a librarian would, kind of give you some good pointers of where to find it. So they're continue listening, because on those calls, the customer oftentimes tells them like, oh, I'm having some trouble with this piece. So all of that goes into a database, and then that information goes to our product development teams to help them prioritize, okay, what do they need to improve? So I love this slide. It just kind of grounds you. I mean, even though I've been doing this for 15 or so years, I like this. I have a book, I don't know if it's really available somewhere, 101 Design Methods. And it's just kind of fun, even though you have kind of like your tried and true research methodologies. Ours definitely would be the contextual inquiry, interviews, heuristic evaluations, and usability think alouds. That you might have a situation where you want to do something, it's a little bit different. Maybe it's more of a design workshop, or you want to do participatory design, have your customers help you design something. So it's a field where you're frequently just learning something new and going back to maybe try something you've never tried before. Our teams, we call them OKRs, objectives and key results. For 2020, for the research team, we have 3 primary buckets. One of them is appreciate and celebrate. And in that bucket, we're focusing more than ever on tracking as much as we can. So we have something to celebrate, and of course, appreciate each other. So when we think of our studies, we're tracking not only how many studies, we want to know how many findings did each study uncover, how many design, we would call them design stories, but like design decisions were impacted by our research, how many participants took place, how much was our spend for all the research that we did. So I have another slide about the things that we're tracking. But as you think about research, and if you would join, even just, you might be, if you go into the research track, if you join a team, maybe you're going to be the first researcher, maybe you're going to join a larger team. But I don't think it really depends on the scale of your work or the size of your company. Like, as soon as you can create a framework for really tracking your efforts, you're going to be able to tell that story at any given time of, well, what's the impact of UX research? How did you make our product better? And I think the challenge is, and why even 12 years into being at Thomson Reuters, we're still fine-tuning this, is that pretty much any given product development team that you may join is going to be agile. They're going to be fast. They're going to want to get their MVP. They want to out the door. They want to move. And through Agile, there's just a lot less documentation. So you have to be able to, as a researcher, go fast, get results quick, but at the same time, do your due diligence to track your backstory, because there'll come a time when someone asks you that question of, well, you know, how did customers influence our design? And you are at that seat, at that, you know, you're the best person to answer that question of being able to see, well, yeah, how did that feedback actually impact this design? So if you don't have documentation, it's going to be really hard to tell that story. So tracking our stats has become really critical for us. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Mentoring and learning, again, we're continually learning and helping each other, especially as a growing team. But if you join a company and you might be the only researcher, and that's pretty frequent in a lot of companies, you might think of, well, mentoring and learning yourself, but also who on your team are you going to want to collaborate and teach some research methods to, so that you can both be researching. So even in a sizable team of ours, 14 or so researchers, we're continually needing to do more. So you're needing to reach out to someone, maybe in the product team, technology teams, and kind of give them up to speed of how do you take notes during a study? So you're training oftentimes. And then research ops, process templates and tools. Again, it doesn't matter how big your team is. If you got to nail this as soon as possible. So what's your process for when a study is requested? And I'll show you a little bit about our process. Templates, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Get your report templates together. Get your templates for, you know, what does it look like to have a task list for your study, or your proposal template. So our primary templates would be the proposal template, the report template, and we have a few little things like kind of how to in different meetings that are related to the process. Recruiting spreadsheet template, so what's the schedule template look like? And then tools, you know, we're at a state, I would say, in the industry where tools aren't perfect, but they're getting there. But what's your tool set so that you can be nimble and do remote research or research, you know, on the fly, in person, in a big lab, or maybe just, you know, at the cafeteria at work and just grabbing people. What are your tool set? So my next slide, this year is big focus for us on research ops. And so there's a definition I just grabbed from the web, and it's really thinking through what's just the culture and the place that research lives, that how should it work so that you can think of the more important things of your study. You know, you want to, as a researcher, you want to be in this mindset of, I just want to focus on this interface or this product and make it better. Everything else should just be kind of automatic. So if you don't have a strong research ops to support you, then you're going to have to be like, you know, spending a lot of time thinking through that. So building a good research ops, you know, what are the roles involved in research, your tools, your processes, and especially will allow you to scale. So if you're just a single researcher, but then you scale and more research, just like what happened at my company. So last January 2019, between January 2019 and the end of the year, we had 7 new researchers start. So not only are you onboarding, but you're having to get someone up to your culture and up to speed and process. So it's really good to have a strong foundation. And then I added a note here saying for us, because you're working in such a fast-paced, agile environment, you have to have a framework to track your value as easily as possible. Like you kind of want your what you're tracking to be easy. It's simple to document because you're just moving forward. But you'll get that question of, well, how did we end up in this design decision? What customer feedback resulted in this? It's good to be able to connect the dots. And I'm just going to skip this to go to something quickly. Let well, maybe I'll go back. I can talk a little bit about our process or our tools or how we are connecting the dots between our findings and our studies and the user needs and all of that. So there's kind of 3 things left for me to talk about. Maybe just a time check. What one would you think most valuable for me to talk about? Maybe I'll cover them all, but what's first? All right, no strong feelings. I will give you just a glance at our process. So I'm just gonna open up a tab. We, as a company, have moved to Office 365 and we're using SharePoint very frequently. We have the Teams channels for communication within your own team, but also like, anyone in the company. It's just nice to use more of that chat base, whether you're going to use Slack or you can use the Teams, whatever else, to have, it's really becoming that more, continuous conversation that's well documented, but also a little more like the hallway chat. Email definitely feels like this formal thing now. So you better have your email well formatted and it's like this official thing that goes out versus if you just want to say, hey, does anyone have this? It's so nice to use Teams. We use SharePoint sites and I'm going to share a glimpse of that. I have 2 primary SharePoint sites that I kind of manage. One's our research teams SharePoint site, and that's going to have all of our documentation for all of our studies. It's going to have our weekly kind of roadmaps as well as the year roadmaps of all the projects in place. It's going to have a little bit of best practice, but I'm not going to go through that one today. But today I'm focused on this UXR playbook. The UXR playbook is more of that research ops. So it's more of the templates in our process, and it is shared by researchers across the Thompson Reuters company. So we have little pockets of researchers throughout, but we can all point to the same UXR playbook. And it's an evolving process. As of now, this is kind of what it looks like. I'm just going to go through this flow. So you're a team. I guess the way we're positioned at Thompson Reuters is we're in the company, but we're also almost a service. So we might be involved in a product throughout the whole development cycle, or we might just get one-off requests. So you kind of have two kinds of projects. You have the ongoing ones, and you might just have one-off research requests. So you have what I would call the pre-intake. So you get a request, but you haven't sat down with the people to really learn about what's this request about. I guess you have a little understanding of like what's the product. So our first thing is just to do a little logistical prep. We just added this line. We're just kind of making sure like we're not forgetting the little things, because little things, if you forget them, then it's like, oh, you have to go back and do it all. So it's just like creating the right folders, getting everything set up for your project. And then we have a strong recommendation for pre-intake homework. So I would think this would be good for any size company, but if you get a request, hey, I want to talk to you about some research for a product ABC. Well, rather than show up to the meeting and saying, well, what is ABC? And they're like, oh, I got to go back to, I have to tell you all about this product. They're usually really excited to do that. You really want to use that intake meeting to get into the nuts and bolts of like, what's the study that you need? So you do your pre-intake homework to reach out to other colleagues, maybe in the UX team most often, or someone else to say like, hey, who's worked on ABC? How can I find materials about it? How can I get up to speed so I can be more educated, informed for that intake? So then we also have pre-logistics meeting. Again, I've put a little bit up here, but it's just like getting everything set up so that when you hit the ground running and you got information, you got your notes from your meetings, you get all this, like maybe they shared a bunch of training materials with you or a lot of stuff, like where does that live? You have it all set up. That's what the logistics is about. And then you got the intake meeting, and that's where you really want to focus on what it is your stakeholders, we call them stakeholders, who you're working with, what do they want to learn. We do have a guide that we put together. We oftentimes just have the guide to the side, so it's, you know, it's a more natural conversation, but then we, at the end, we look back at the guide and say, okay, do we cover all these questions? You want to understand, I mean, one of the big things would be, when do you need the research by? How is this impacting your decisions? Because sometimes they might say, you know, we're still in the discovery phase and the next quarter would be great. Or sometimes they might say, oh yeah, tech's building this in 3 weeks, in start of May. Like, okay, if we're going to have any impact on the decisions that tech is building this product, we go better do something really, really fast. So you want to know, like, when do you need that research by? You want to know, what are their goals? We have a guide on how to write study goals. When you write a study goal, you really think about how, let's see, actually this should be linkable. What are you measuring? So rather than, I think I have some comparisons. Maybe I don't. All right, this is a comparison. So someone might say, oh yeah, I just want you to evaluate that search icon. It's like, well, what does that even mean? So you want to know, what's important about this search icon? Are we evaluating the findability of it? Like, can someone find where to search? Are we evaluating the ease of use? So when you find it and now you have to type in a query, is that easy? Are we evaluating efficiency? Like, does this have to be something that they have to search about 100 times a day and it better be very fast? So you want to make sure when you write your goal, you're highlighting kind of that piece that you're measuring. And you might be measuring multiple things. They might say, yeah, you want to findability of the search icon and efficiency, memorability, that comes into place. Like if someone's only using your product, you know, maybe once a month, but they just want to get in and get out, you want something really memorable. Yeah, so that's in our intake meeting, at least to start understanding what is it that this study needs to be about. And then we go back and we usually, you know, think through a bunch of things. And then we go to what we call a kickoff meeting. So the kickoff meeting is when you present your proposal. We have a proposal template. It is in a PowerPoint that's in the cloud. And now we're like connecting it to all the SharePoint sites or even like Teams groups. And it's great to have this one source of truth. And I would say it was difficult to have that pre-Office 365, like pre-cloud, because you might be like sending this proposal and everyone's like, great, that looks good. And then it gets dusty and kind of forgotten about. Like you want that proposal, even though it's kind of that start of the document, you want it to be a living thing. Because even though you like have a lot of ideas and it, you know, you want it, you know, agreed upon, there'll always be a little bit of changes trickling in. So you want to make sure you're updating that proposal. It's like, this is the source of truth. And I will say the cloud capabilities make that a lot easier, that you're not, someone doesn't have the outdated version, like everyone's pointed to the right version. And you're going to start your recruiting. We have the luxury of having someone focused on recruiting. You might be doing that as a researcher yourself, and then preparing for your study. We have two things that happen before the study, pretty much regardless of methodology, but certainly for real-time types of methodologies, whether it's an interview or a think aloud usability. And the two things are a dry run and a pilot. A dry run is going to be just with all your final materials, your prototype, your facilitator guide, everything's ready, and it's just with your stakeholders. So you can be, you know, hopefully they were involved in that kind of, you know, you had some check-ins with them, but you don't want them to be surprised when like, whoa, I didn't realize you were testing that. Like, you don't want any surprises. So the dry run is just with them, and then the pilot is a practice run with someone that's playing the role of a participant. You do your study. you want as many, ideally a debrief after each session. And what I mean by a debrief, some people call it an interpretation session. You would have whoever on your team, the stakeholders, your fellow researchers, like whoever observed, to get together with you after the study and say, what did we learn? So you start documenting it. Because if you get a head start on documenting, you're going to have a head start on like key takeaways and of course your analysis. I think I'm running up on some time here, so let me just go back. I'll just go back here. So it gets complex. Like if I'm overwhelming you, just take a deep breath and be like, at the end of the day, if you do a study with some participants, that's a great step forward. But when you're running a team of like 14 researchers and there's this research piling in, like you really have to make sure you got a well-run team, you got some templates, you got some process. So it's kind of a field that it's continually to grow and you're continually just like fine tuning. But don't get overwhelmed because again, if you get some feedback from someone on your ideas, on your prototype, on your designs, that's a win. You just want to make sure as you continue to do that you're being able to tell the story of like, well, I talked to 5 different people. How did that really impact my decisions? And that's where we're at today. So for the last couple of minutes, so where we're at today is really figuring out what are we tracking. We call it quantifying the qualitative, because most of our studies as a UX researcher are qualitative. They're talking to a handful of people and getting lots of just feedback about a design and how they used it. So, but numbers are huge in business. And again, telling that story. So we want to we have what we call, but SharePoint lists. SharePoint lists, you get into the world of SharePoint, it's like really complex. I don't know, I am just touching the surface of the SharePoint iceberg. But lists, if you get these lists, each item in that list has a URL, which is beautiful because you can have a finding, let's say a finding list. You're doing research and research and research. Pretty soon you got like 100 findings. Now that all those findings have a little URL, you can tie that to a design decision, because oftentimes a design decision or a design story is going to be, they're going to be using a product. You might hear Jira, Azure DevOps, TFS, like there's all these different products that where tech and design are organizing their work. You want your research to get into those products. And by SharePoint list, you have a little URL, so you can be like, here's a little group of findings that is about this story and it's tracked. So you kind of give it life. You want, when you do research, you want those findings to have as long a shelf life as possible so that it's not just like forgotten about and report gets dusty. You want them to like be relevant and like follow wherever the decisions are being made. So this is just a very draft, messy thing. And this is what we do. I'm doing like this coming week just to figure out, okay, we got all these lists. We got some findings, got some studies. We got a much more kind of like holistic view of user needs. So user needs are really like, regardless of a solution, what does the user really just need? How does that tie into our studies and our findings? Participants, we have a CRM. So how many, what studies are they participating in? So lots of little networks going on here. Personas, what personas were involved in these findings that impacted these user needs? So you kind of think about like what's the relationship between these things? So you can get really, again, world of UX research can get really complex, but it's fun. Are we at time?
Yeah, let's have a few questions. Any questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask.
What's your work-life balance like?
Yeah, well, it ebbs and flows. um, I would say, I mean, personally at Thompson Reuters, it's really good. Uh, my personal challenge is I've got 3 kids under age 5, so my life will only get better, only get easier. But I will say, being quarantined, I share an office with my husband. It's Saturday, so he's not, he's out there, but he would be sitting there. And we very fortunately have someone that comes over and watches the kids, because I got a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Of course, they're not in school. So I will say the tension is sometimes work-life. When I think of work-life balance, you kind of think, are you able to really focus on one at a time and happily? And sometimes the tension happens when they're like butting heads. So when you have a big report due, but it's, you have to be done at 3:30 because you have to watch your kids. So, but I will say, you just get used to it. And I was reading an article last night just about particular quarantine situation. They called it, what do they call it? Window boxing or something, where they said people's lives now, you're not 9 to 5. You got to figure out, you might do a 7 to 10 in the morning. You might have a break to do something, and you might do something 6 to 11 at night. So the world, our world currently is really much more flexible. But I would say pre-quarantine work-life balance, it was good. I think I always go back to, it's not how much you work, but it's the quality of your work. And I really just learned that lesson when I had kids, because before kids, I'm kind of a workaholic. And so I was happy, so I was fine. But, be like Friday night, I'd just be like really wanting to dive into these lists and like figure it out. It'd be so fun. But obviously I can't do that now. So it's really thinking, okay, I have certain hours at work, and I do not, when I'm in life mode, non-work mode, I don't want that trickling in. I don't want to be thinking of an email when I want to be focused on the kids. So I'm much more focused on what's the quality, like what am I going to have an impact on? Yeah, I could be like turning my wheels on a certain thing, but what's going to move this forward? And that's where, having goals, we've got these OKRs, like, okay, here's our buckets. Am I working on something that's not even related to this? It's just this email chain that's like all these emails, and they're trying to, like, is it important for me to respond to this, or should I be doing something else? So you always have to think about that.
Shannon, there's another question in chat. What software or other tech components are vital to come into the field with?
Yes, good question. Actually, I think I missed that slide. I mean, coming into the field, I think most of these tools are pretty easy to get up to speed with, but as you are in the field, you want to be able to say, yeah, you've worked with these different tools. So you're going to probably want something that says you've done moderated research, and I should say moderated remote research primarily. We're currently comparing Microsoft Teams, Validately, Look Back, and Join Me. We had WebEx for a very long time, and as of April 30th, so next week or so, the company's moving away from that and using Microsoft Teams. But we as a research team have to look at, like, is this even going to fit our needs? We need to connect with a customer. We need to share our screen, but we'd love to pass mouse control so that they can control the prototype on our screen. And a lot of these tools aren't doing that. So we'd have to it might come down to, we have to shift how we work, where we get the prototype in InVision, in Acture, so that people are sharing their screen. The prototype doesn't live on our own, behind our firewall. But sorry, remote research tools, they're basically just web conferencing tools with some different features. Unmoderated research, definitely dive into, there's a long list of this, but our tools right now are UserZoom and Optimal Workshop. So thinking about some studies, you might want a survey that maybe a card sort, maybe just some what's called unmoderated tasks. So you can point them to a prototype or an interface, even a live site, and say, hey, find this. And the tool itself tracks, did they find it? How long did it take? Were they successful? So, dabble in getting up to speed. They're fairly easy to learn, but learning those. Survey tools. UserZoom does have a survey tool. We're having to use Merit CX, which I think is going to be, it's pretty complex, but it's because all the researchers at the company are going to be using it, including market research, which does, 1,000-person surveys. So it's going to be a pretty complex tool. I only have one researcher on my team have a license, well, because it's expensive, but also because I think there needs to be some training in that. But if you can just use tools like SurveyMonkey, that's more typical. Can you use SurveyMonkey? Can you set up some logic in there? Analysis, Lucidchart, that would be an area to play around with as you're in school and you might be doing studies of your own. This is becoming much more of a popular tool for my team, and there's probably similar tools out there. But for my team to do analysis, they might still be taking their notes like in Excel or even Word. But if you have Excel, just like your verbatim, as much notes as you can during a session, you could upload those into Lucidchart, and you can auto-generate little cute digital post-it notes, and you can do that more kind of digital, physical, visual organization of your data. You can also point everyone to this Lucidchart, so everyone's kind of collaborating. Research is becoming, and analysis particularly, becoming a very collaborative effort. So working with the designers that we're seeing the session and the product owners. So Lucidchart, being able to get in there and use the tool set that it provides would be great. DocuSign, we have a few recruiting tools. DocuSign to get our NDAs signed. Calendly, or we might be using Microsoft Bookings. We have to determine that this week. Easy way to just provide your participants, here's some time options, like click it, a calendar invite's generated. Like you just don't you want to streamline recruiting as much as possible. SharePoint, if your company's going to be using SharePoint, yeah, it's the whole world. So that would be really good to know some SharePoint information.
Great. We are really at time. So
sorry.
I
could talk about research like all day.
Yeah. But this is really a fantastic overview, and you have presented processes and methods and specific tools. Let's give Shannon another round of applause, and can students contact you if they have questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, do you have my Gmail?
Yeah. So folks, if you have questions for Shannon, you are welcome to send them to me and I'll forward to Shannon. All right. So thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, it was a great presentation, and I hope to do this sometime again.
That sounds good. Have a great Saturday.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you too. Bye.